School bullies attack. Quiet kid, they had no idea he was a champion fighter. Elijah Parker kept his head down as he walked through the crowded hallways of Westridge High School. At 15, he was shorter than most boys his age, with a thin frame that made him look almost fragile. His oversized glasses slid down his nose every few minutes, and he pushed them back up with a practiced motion. New to the school after his family's recent move, Elijah had quickly learned the art of invisibility, walking close to walls, avoiding eye contact, and blending into backgrounds. No one at Westridge knew that, behind his quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance, Elijah was a 3-time junior state champion in mixed martial arts. His father, a former UFC fighter, had trained him since he was 6 years old. Their garage at home was converted into a fully equipped training space where Elijah spent hours perfecting his technique. But after an incident at his previous school, where he'd seriously injured a student who had attacked him first, his parents had made him promise to keep his training secret and avoid fights at all costs. Look who it is, Four Eyes Parker. The voice of Derek Summers, the school's self-appointed alpha male, rang out in the hallway. At 17, Derek was tall and muscular from playing football, with short blonde hair and a perpetual smirk. His two sidekicks, Marco Diaz and Tyler Johnson, flanked him like loyal soldiers. Elijah sighed inwardly but kept walking. Just ignore them. Remember what Dad said. Fighting is only for self-defense, and only as a last resort. Hey, I'm talking. To you! Derek stepped directly into Elijah's path, blocking him from reaching his locker. What's the rush, new kid? Too good to say hello? Elijah finally looked up. I need to get to class, Derek. Oh, he knows my name, Derek said, looking at his friends with mock surprise. I'm honored. Guess what, Parker? You need to pay the new kid tax. $20. Now. Students around them began to slow down, sensing a confrontation. Some watched with interest, others with discomfort, but no one intervened. I don't have any money on me, Elijah replied evenly, though his heart was beginning to race. Stay calm. Don't engage. Then I guess we'll have to take something else. Derek reached out and snatched Elijah's backpack, unzipping it and dumping its contents onto the floor. Notebooks, pencils, and textbooks scattered across the hallway tile. Miss Rodriguez, the English teacher, walked past at that moment. She frowned slightly but only said, You boys get to class. The bell's about to ring. Then she continued walking, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened. Elijah knelt down to gather his belongings, his cheeks burning with humiliation as people stepped around him, some snickering. Marco accidentally kicked a textbook further down the hall. See you at lunch, Four Eyes, Derek called as he sauntered away. Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he collected his things. They're not worth it. This will pass. But it didn't. Pass? Over the next 2 weeks, Derek and his friends made Elijah's life increasingly miserable. They tripped him in the cafeteria, causing him to spill his lunch tray in front of everyone. They stole his gym clothes, forcing him to participate in PE wearing his regular clothes and earning him a failing grade for the day. They created a cruel nickname, Shaky Parker, after noticing how he sometimes trembled when nervous, and it quickly spread throughout the school. The worst incident came during chemistry lab when Derek accidentally knocked over a beaker near Elijah, splashing chemicals onto his lab notebook and ruining weeks of work. Mr. Hoffman, the chemistry teacher, had merely sighed and told Elijah he'd have to redo the assignments, despite several students witnessing that Derek was responsible. Elijah endured it all silently. During one particularly bad incident in the boys' bathroom, where Derek had shoved him against the wall and threatened to really hurt him if he ever looked at him wrong again, Elijah had actually felt his training kick in, his body automatically positioning for a counterattack, muscles tensing, breath steadying. It had taken every ounce of willpower to override those instincts and remain passive. At home, he trained harder than ever, channeling his frustration into the punching bag, his father noticed. Something going on at school? James Parker asked one evening, holding the heavy bag steady as Elijah unleashed a series of precise, powerful strikes. Nothing I can't handle, Elijah replied, punctuating his words with a particularly forceful kick that made the bag swing violently. His father studied him for a moment. Remember what we talked about? I know, Dad, Elijah interrupted. Fighting isn't the answer. I promised, okay? His mother, Sarah, watching from the doorway of the garage, frowned with concern. Elijah, if someone's bothering you, we can talk to the school administration. Elijah shook his head. That would just make it worse. He knew from experience that adult intervention often amplified bullying rather than stopping it. At his last school, the principal's talk with his tormentors had resulted in twice the harassment, just more covert. The promise was becoming harder to keep. Each day, the bullying intensified. Derek seemed to interpret Elijah's restraint as weakness, which only emboldened him further. One day in the cafeteria, as Elijah sat alone at his usual corner table, he felt someone watching him. Looking up, he met the eyes of Sophia Lynn, a quiet girl from his math class. She offered a small smile before looking away quickly. It was the first friendly gesture anyone had made toward him in weeks. The next day, Sophia sat down across from him at lunch. "You don't have to sit here," Elijah said immediately. "It's not good for your reputation." "I don't care about that," Sophia replied, opening her lunch bag. "Those guys are jerks. Everyone knows it, but they're too scared to say anything." "Why aren't you scared?" She shrugged. "My brother was bullied before he transferred schools. I saw what it did to him. I promised myself I wouldn't be one of those people who just watches." A small warmth bloomed in Elijah's chest. Maybe Westridge wasn't completely terrible. That warmth vanished when Derek and his friends approached their table, trays in hand. Well, Shaky Parker's got a girlfriend," Derek announced loudly, setting his tray down and sitting uninvited next to Sophia, who immediately stiffened. "Leave us alone, Derek," she said firmly. "Or what?" Derek laughed, then turned to Elijah. "You gonna let your girlfriend fight your battles, Parker? That's pathetic even for you." Elijah remained silent, focusing on controlling his breathing. "Don't react, it's not worth it." "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Derek reached over and grabbed Elijah's chocolate milk, opening it and taking a deliberate sip. "Thanks for the drink, Shaky." Elijah's hand tightened around his fork and he forced himself to relax his grip. He caught Sophia's eye, and the look of indignation on her face nearly broke his resolve. "You don't have to take this," she said quietly. "Trust me, I know," Elijah replied, equally quiet. Derek, apparently bored with Elijah's lack of response, turned his attention to Sophia. "How you can do better than this loser, you know. How about you sit with us tomorrow instead?" "Not interested," Sophia said coldly. Derek's smile faltered. "Playing hard to get. That's cute." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her, his hand lingering. Sophia jerked away. "Don't touch me." Something shifted in Elijah then. The line between enduring harassment himself and watching someone else be harassed because of him was one he wasn't willing to cross. She said, "Don't touch her," Elijah said, his voice steady and somehow different than it had been before. A few students at nearby tables turned to look. Derek raised his eyebrows, seeming both surprised and pleased that he'd finally provoked a response. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it, Shaky?" Elijah stood up slowly. For the first time since arriving at Westridge, he allowed himself to stand at his full height, shoulders back, the perpetual slouch gone. "I'm asking you nicely to leave us alone, Derek." Derek and his friends exchanged amused glances. The cafeteria had grown quieter as more students tuned into the confrontation. "Are you threatening me?" Derek asked, standing as well. He was still taller than Elijah, and he used that height to try to intimidate, leaning forward slightly. "No," Elijah replied calmly. "I'm just asking you to leave." "Or what?" "Or nothing. Just leave." Derek looked around at the watching crowd, then back at Elijah. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Make me." He shoved Elijah hard, causing him to stumble back a step. The cafeteria went completely silent. Elijah regained his balance and took a deep breath. "I don't want to fight you." "Too bad," Derek said and lunged forward with a wild punch aimed at Elijah's face. What happened next left the entire cafeteria in shock. Elijah moved with lightning speed, sidestepping the punch with practiced ease. Derek, thrown off balance by his missed swing, stumbled forward. Elijah simply stepped aside, making no move to counter. "What the?" Derek spun around, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Lucky dodge, freak. Let's see you try that again." He came at Elijah more carefully this time, fists raised in a crude boxing stance. He jabbed with his left, then followed with a right hook. Elijah parried the jab and ducked under the hook, still making no offensive moves. By now, students were standing on chairs and tables to get a better view. Some had their phones out, recording the unexpected showdown. Derek's frustration mounted with each failed attack. "Fight back, you coward." "I don't need to," Elijah replied, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Just stop this, Derek, it's over." The words only enraged Derek further. With a roar, he charged Elijah like a bull, attempting to tackle him to the ground. In one fluid motion, Elijah sidestepped, used Derek's momentum against him, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent Derek crashing onto a nearby table, scattering trays and food. The cafeteria erupted in surprised gasps and exclamations. Marco and Tyler, seeing their leader humiliated, decided to join the fight. They approached from opposite sides, thinking to overwhelm Elijah. It was a mistake. Elijah's training had included defending against multiple attackers. He moved with precision and control, blocking, dodging, and redirecting their attacks while delivering precise strikes of his own, just enough to neutralize the threat without causing serious harm. Within moments, Marco was on the floor, clutching his stomach after a well-placed front kick, and Tyler was backing away, blood trickling from his nose after running into Elijah's elbow while attempting a wild swing. Derek, having recovered from his initial shock, lunged at Elijah from behind, with a cafeteria chair raised above his head. Students screamed warnings, but Elijah had already sensed the movement. He pivoted, caught the chair mid-swing, and wrenched it from Derek's grasp. In the same motion, he delivered a palm strike to Derek's sternum that sent the larger boy staggering backward, gasping for breath. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. "I told you," Elijah said, his voice carrying in the silent cafeteria. "I don't want to fight, but I can if I have to." Derek looked up at him with a mixture of pain, shock, and growing fear. "What the hell are you?" "Just someone who's had enough of being bullied," Elijah replied, "and enough of watching others get bullied too." The cafeteria remained silent as Elijah turned back to his table, where Sophia sat with wide eyes. Before he could say anything, the double doors burst open and Principal Mercer strode in, followed by 2 teachers. "What is going on here?" she demanded, surveying the chaotic scene. Overturned trays, food scattered across the floor, and 3 of the school's star athletes in various states of disarray. 20 voices spoke at once, creating a cacophony of explanations. Principal Mercer held up her hand for silence. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Summers, Mr. Diaz, and Mr. Johnson. My office, now." The walk to the principal's office was tense. Derek and his friends walked ahead, occasionally throwing venomous glances back at Elijah, who followed at a distance. By the time they reached the administrative wing, Derek had regained some of his bravado. "You're dead meat, Parker," he muttered, as they waited outside Principal Mercer's office. "My dad's a lawyer. You're going to get expelled for this." Elijah didn't respond. His initial adrenaline rush was fading, replaced by a growing concern. Had he broken his promise to his parents? Had he gone too far? Inside the office, Principal Mercer listened to all sides of the story. To Elijah's surprise, several students had followed them and were insisting on speaking to the principal. One by one, they came forward to describe weeks of harassment that they had witnessed. Some even admitted shamefully that they had laughed along or done nothing to help. "He never fought back until today," one girl said. And even then he was just defending himself and Sophia. Principal Mercer turned to Derek and his friends. "Is this true? Have you been harassing Mr. Parker since his arrival?" Derek's face had turned an ugly shade of red. "He's lying. They're all lying. He attacked us for no reason." "That's not what the security cameras will show," Principal Mercer replied coldly. "This school has a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, Mr. Summers. You and your friends will be suspended, pending a full investigation." She turned to Elijah. "As for you, Mr. Parker, while I understand you were defending yourself, physical violence is never the answer. I'll be calling your parents to discuss this incident." Elijah nodded, resigned to whatever consequences would come. At least the truth was out now. When his parents arrived at the school, Elijah braced himself for their disappointment. Instead, after a long meeting with Principal Mercer, his father placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son," he said quietly as they walked to the car. Elijah looked up in surprise. "But I broke my promise. I fought. You showed restraint." "For weeks while being tormented," his mother said. "And when you finally did act, it wasn't to protect yourself, it was to protect someone else. That's exactly what we've taught you martial arts is for." His father nodded in agreement. "There's a difference between starting a fight and ending one that someone else started. You did the right thing." The next day, Elijah returned to school with trepidation. He expected whispers, stares, perhaps even fear. What he found instead was respect. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded in acknowledgement as he passed. A few even approached to apologize for not standing up sooner. At lunch, he was surprised to find not just Sophia waiting for him, but several other students who invited him to join their table. "That was incredible yesterday," one boy said. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My dad's been training me since I was little," Elijah replied, still uncomfortable with the attention. "But fighting should always be the last resort." "Well, Derek and his friends had it coming," another student said. "They've been terrorizing people for years." The videos from the cafeteria had spread throughout the school, and by the end of the day it seemed everyone had seen Elijah's display of martial arts prowess. Some of the footage even made its way to social media, where it quickly garnered thousands of views. Derek and his friends were absent, serving the first day of their 2-week suspension. When they eventually returned, the dynamic had shifted permanently. Derek avoided Elijah entirely, giving him a wide berth in the hallways. The few times their eyes did meet, Derek quickly looked away. But the real test came 3 days after the suspension ended. Elijah was walking across the school playground during lunch break, deep in conversation with Sophia about their upcoming math test, when he heard a commotion. A crowd had gathered at the far end of the playground, and from the excited voices, Elijah could tell something was wrong. He and Sophia exchanged glances before heading over to investigate. Pushing through the crowd, Elijah was shocked to see Derek and his friends surrounding a small freshman boy who was clutching his backpack to his chest, terror evident in his eyes. "Give it up, kid," Derek was saying, his voice low and threatening. "I know you've got money in there." The freshman, Elijah later learned his name was Evan, was trembling. "Please, I need this for lunch for the rest of the week." Derek reached out to grab the backpack, and Evan flinched. It was a scene all too familiar to Elijah, but this time he was no longer the victim. "Hey," Elijah called out, stepping forward. The crowd parted for him, whispers following in his wake. Derek froze, his hand still extended toward Evan. Slowly he turned to face Elijah, and for a moment, genuine fear flashed across his face. It was quickly replaced by a mask of bravado. "This doesn't concern you, Parker," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Yes, it does," Elijah replied, continuing to approach steadily. "You're still bullying people, Derek. I thought you might have learned something." Derek glanced around, seeming to draw strength from the crowd of onlookers. "What are you going to do about it? Fight me again? Right here in front of everyone?" Elijah stopped about 10 feet away. "I don't want to fight you, but I will if I have to." The playground had gone completely silent. Everyone remembered what had happened in the cafeteria. Videos had been shared, stories exaggerated. In some versions, Elijah had single-handedly taken down 5 attackers instead of 3. Derek looked at Marco and Tyler, who stood slightly behind him. Neither seemed eager to engage. Derek turned back to Elijah, hatred evident in his eyes. "You think you're so special with your kung fu bullshit," Derek snarled. "Let's see how tough you really are." With that, he charged forward, swinging wildly at Elijah's face. The crowd gasped, phones were raised to record, and several teachers in the distance began running toward the commotion, but they were too far away to intervene. This time Elijah knew he would have to handle things himself. Just as in the cafeteria, Elijah's training took over. He sidestepped Derek's punch with fluid grace, but unlike before, he didn't merely evade. This time, he counterattacked. Derek's momentum carried him forward. Elijah delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus. Just enough to wind him, not enough to cause lasting damage. Derek doubled over, gasping for breath. Marco, seeing his friend in trouble, rushed forward next. Elijah pivoted, using Marco's own momentum to flip him over his hip. Marco landed hard on his back, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. Tyler, the last of the trio, hesitated. His eyes darted from his fallen friends to Elijah, who stood calmly in a fighting stance, ready but not aggressive. "Don't," Elijah warned. Tyler backed away, hands raised in surrender. The entire confrontation had lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to those watching. As the teachers finally arrived, panting and demanding explanations, the crowd erupted into excited chatter. Evan, the freshman who had been the initial target, looked at Elijah with awe. "That was amazing," he whispered. "Thank you." Principal Mercer was less impressed when all parties were once again brought to her office. This time, however, there were dozens of witnesses eager to testify that Elijah had intervened to stop bullying, not to start a fight. "This is your second physical altercation in 2 weeks, Mr. Parker," Principal Mercer said sternly. "While your intentions may have been good, we have proper channels for reporting bullying." "With all due respect, Principal Mercer," Sophia interjected from where she stood by the door, having insisted on accompanying Elijah, "those channels don't work. You suspended Derek and his friends, and as soon as they came back, they went right back to bullying, just picking different targets." Principal Mercer frowned but didn't dispute the accusation. "Nevertheless, I cannot condone violence as a solution." "What about a supervised program?" Elijah suggested suddenly. "What if I taught basic self-defense classes after school, not to hurt others, but to help people protect themselves and build confidence?" Principal Mercer raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting I reward your fighting by allowing you to teach others to fight?" "No," Elijah replied. "I'm suggesting you let me teach others how to avoid fighting whenever possible, and how to end fights quickly and safely when there's no other choice. To everyone's surprise, Principal Mercer actually considered the idea. Your father would need to be involved, given his professional background, and there would need to be strict guidelines. Of course, Elijah agreed quickly. That afternoon, when Elijah's parents once again came to the school, they weren't there to discuss punishment. Instead, they met with Principal Mercer to outline a program that would eventually become one of Westridge High's most popular after-school activities, the Self-Defense and Anti-Bullying Initiative. Derek and his friends were given a choice: a month-long suspension and a permanent mark on their records, or participation in the program as part of their rehabilitation. To everyone's surprise, they chose the latter. The first session was awkward, to say the least. Derek stood sullenly at the back of the gymnasium as Elijah and his father began by teaching the group about the philosophy behind martial arts: discipline, respect, and self-control. True strength, James Parker told the assembled students, isn't about dominating others. It's about having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to. Over the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Derek, who had initially participated only to avoid suspension, began to show genuine interest. His natural athleticism made him a quick study, and Elijah found himself impressed by Derek's potential. One afternoon, after most students had left, Derek approached Elijah as he was putting away equipment. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said, his usual swagger noticeably absent. Elijah nodded warily. "Why didn't you fight back sooner? You could have wiped the floor with me from day one." Elijah considered the question. "Because fighting is serious. Once you start, someone always gets hurt." "I was hoping I wouldn't have to." Derek was quiet for a moment. "I've been a real asshole, haven't I?" "Pretty much," Elijah agreed, but there was no malice in his tone. "My dad," Derek began, then stopped. "Never mind. It's not an excuse." Elijah waited, sensing there was more. "My dad always said you have to be tough, you know. That if you don't push others around, they'll push you around instead." Derek shook his head. "But watching you in that cafeteria and then on the playground, you're the toughest guy I've ever met, and you don't push anyone around. Different." "Kind of tough," Elijah said. "My dad taught me that true toughness is here." He tapped his temple, and here. He placed a hand over his heart. "Not in how hard you can hit." Derek nodded slowly. "Think you could teach me that kind of tough?" It wasn't an instant transformation. Derek had years of bad habits and toxic beliefs to unlearn, but over time, with Elijah's guidance and his own determination, he began to change. The boy who had once been Westridge's most feared bully gradually became one of its most respected leaders, using his natural charisma to unite rather than intimidate. As for Elijah, the shy, reserved boy who had walked through Westridge's doors determined to stay invisible, found himself at the center of a movement. The Self-Defense and Anti-Bullying Initiative expanded to other schools in the district, and Elijah often traveled with his father to help establish new programs. Sophia remained by his side through it all, her quiet strength and unwavering support a constant source of inspiration. They became inseparable, their relationship growing deeper as they worked together to transform their school's culture. By the time graduation rolled around 2 years later, Westridge High School had been recognized nationally for its innovative approach to combating bullying. Derek and Elijah, once adversaries, stood side by side in their caps and gowns, evidence that people could change, that cycles of violence could be broken. In his valedictorian speech, Elijah reflected on his journey. "When I came to Westridge, I was hiding who I really was. I was afraid that my strength would hurt others, so I pretended to be weak. What I've learned since then is that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right. Even when it's difficult, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show restraint, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is take action." He looked out at his classmates, his gaze lingering on Derek for a moment before continuing. "We all have power. The power to hurt, the power to help, the power to change lives. The question isn't whether you have power. The question is how you choose to use it." As he stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, Elijah Parker was no longer the boy who had walked into Westridge High School 3 years earlier, hoping no one would notice him. He had become someone who couldn't be ignored, not because of his fighting skills, but because of his character. The bullies had indeed chosen the wrong target that day in the cafeteria, but their mistake had led to transformation not just for Elijah but for the entire school. Sometimes, Elijah reflected, the wrong choice could lead to the right outcome, and sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone else too.